everyone watching and listening. Good morning from North Carolina. Welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast, episode number 6. This is your host, Swami Padmanabha, and here today very happy to be in the company of another radical personalist, if you allow me, Vrinda-sundari Dasi. So Vrinda-sundari, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. And I'd like to share a few words of Vrinda-sundari's biography to begin with, and then we will proceed towards today's topic, transformative communication in Bhakti. So Vrinda-sundari Devi Dasi is a designer, creator, a certified transformative coach, homeschooling mother of two, co-temple president at ISKCON Denver, founder and manager of Harmonist Sanctuary, and seminar staff and seminar organizer for Sattva Institute. She was introduced to Bhakti philosophy and practice in 2000 in Lawrence, Kansas, while she was studying architecture and textile design at Kansas University. She lives with her husband and 2 children in Denver, Colorado. So I'm sharing, before I forget, for whomever would like to contact her eventually or know more about her activities, this is a contact Vrinda at harmonistsanctuary.org. So, in my personal case, I got to meet Vrinda-sundari personally a few weeks ago for the first time. But somehow we were connected with each other for a few months already with her and her husband, Tusta Krishna Prabhu. If I'm not mistaken, you correct me, Vrinda-sundari, if I'm wrong, but I think you contacted me, or we contacted each other for the first time, or one of the first times when I started my series of lectures on radical personalism. And eventually, of course, we shared some common points and thoughts about that with her, with Tusta Krishna, and eventually Vrinda-sundari very generously invited me to a Sattva retreat seminar, which was a retreat in itself, that took place in Denver a few weeks ago. So I was fortunate enough to be there and continue sharing common points of interest with her. So Vrinda-sundari, let me know why you consider important to be part of this discussion. And also in that connection, I like to ask my guests, what's radical personalism for you? What does it mean to you?
To me, it means staying fresh and alive in our spiritual life and our life in general. And I do want to say that when I was reading your book, actually, I was listening to your lectures first. I found that a lot of things that you were saying were things that I had been thinking about myself and discussing with my husband in private. And so I felt refreshed in hearing the things that you were speaking about. And so then reading the book, further expounded on all those ideas. So yeah, I'm really appreciating the next further development of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and as a collective of individuals who are all growing and continue to grow. So radical personalism to me means a further expansion and development of our spiritual lives and our lives as individuals and as a collective.
Thank you so much. Beautiful way of putting it. Further expansion, which, has no limits, basically. So here we are trying to explore the unlimited limits of how much we can expand as individuals and collective. And part of that is, of course, in tie with the idea of how we relate to one another, how we communicate with one another. And that's why today's title is Transformative Communication in Bhakti. And somehow we concluded on that title together with Vrinda-sundari. One of the reasons, of course, as you've just heard her credentials, I think it's a topic that perfectly matches her area of expertise, but also I think it's a topic that perfectly matches the necessity of the present moment, and something that I personally consider crucial to be embraced not only in the current condition of the Gaudiya community at large, but also in connection to humanity at large, a very crucial aspect of it. So as usual, I used to read a brief section from the Radical Personalism book, in connection to which we will explore this topic. And so today's section is found in page 124, and it's called Radical Conversation. So I'll read it briefly. It says like this: real holistic dialogue is one of the most fundamental key features of any healthy community and relationship, and it is profoundly lacking in our present-day interactions among ourselves and with other communities. As a solution to this, we Gaudiyas should be open to learn, not only from members of our own lineage, but also from other traditions, appreciating their contributions in ways that complement our own school rather than compete with it. We'd call this radical conversation. So this particular section from the Radical Personalism book inspired the title for today's episode. And of course, this section that I've just read, as you can realize, speaks of conversation among members of the same tradition, members in this case of Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, and also speaks about an extended version of it in terms of how we relate with other traditions. But I think today, let's see where we end up, but probably we'll mostly explore and concentrate on the first aspect of it, transformative communication in Bhakti, although we may be touching on how also we may relate with other traditions as well. So, Vrinda-sundari, let me know if you have any thoughts to begin with sharing today.
Well, I was reading in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Rupa Shiksha, about the pulling the weeds process recently, and to learn further and to meditate on pulling the weeds in connection with transformative communication. And then I went into Bhaktivinode Thakura's Krishna Samhita, where he discusses the demons of Vraj and how they are obstacles. And I was looking for more explanation about the weeds, because Srila Prabhupada in his purports on Chaitanya Charitamrita, in that section, he emphasizes how important pulling the weeds process is next to watering the Bhakti Lata. So interestingly, when I started to read Krishna Samhita, I found other things there that were related to transformative communication. And one was transformation, because I was meditating, okay, what does transformation mean in Bhakti? No, material energy transforms all the time, but there's no actual progress being made. So what does transformation mean? And that's the one thing I discovered was Bhaktivinode Thakura speaking about progress. He also speaks about progress in the Bhagavat, but he speaks about Bhagavat, but the progress in Krishna Samhita. So he's very clear in his English writing, the Bhagavat, that progress is a law of nature. And so so transformation in Bhakti is uncovering, and it's a clearing process, and it's a cultivation, and it's a full transformation. So staying alive and being alive and staying fresh is being naturally in the growth, on the growth edge, and naturally developing all the time. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, that's a great kickstart. Thank you. Yeah, and you refer to very foundational texts like the Bhagavad speech of Bhaktivinode Thakura, which is like genius-like, and how he emphasizes the Saragrahi spirit and the progressive thinker in Vaishnavism, how he's expected to be. And yeah, I was thinking also in terms of today's title, which I of course consider very clear and very specific, but also it's redundant, and I'm not criticizing the title. I'm just saying redundant in the sense that ideally communication has to be ideally transformative. What to speak if it's in Bhakti? But sometimes we are forced to clarify all the things, because sometimes there's so little communication, transformation in the name of communication, even in the context of bhakti. But strictly speaking, yeah, we practice bhakti yoga, no? And yoga means, I would like to translate it as communion, which interestingly for me, the very root of the word is tied with the idea of communication. I will say communication may be like a preliminary step into communion, into this common union. So if yoga is communion and bhakti means love, and love is the most transformative thing of all, you have love and communion in love, bhakti yoga. So in that sense, I will say it's redundant, but at the same time, it's important to clarify that, yeah, communication has to be transformative, especially if we are talking in the context of bhakti.
Yeah, the same with communication. Communication seems like, oh, just whatever, how we speak with someone or how we're writing, but communication means union. It means there's some connection. And that means there's relationship. And I know that's one thing that you mentioned in your book, in Radical Personalism, is how we're always in relationship with every living entity, with Krishna. And actually, in one sense, we are relationship. Or existence means relationship. So if our existence means relationship and communication doesn't take place without relationship, then communication and relationship is directly, they're very related, connected, and if not intrinsically the same.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Existence means relationship, and we are relationship. We are interrelated, and we, as you mentioned, if their communication could be synonymous with relationship, and existence means relationship. So existence without communication, therefore, it's not existence at all. So that's how crucial is it. Yeah, so that's how crucial is the topic of communication, because if you don't have it in place, basically proper existence is not in place. And I appreciate what you mentioned, that communication is not just, okay, today we will share some techniques or like, it's a technical affair. No? Technical affairs so the other people doesn't get hurt so easily. Yeah, not to touch others' susceptibility, but no, communication goes way beyond. It's just part of the very ontology and nature of reality. But again, I think it's sometimes important to make the difference between transformative communication and informative communication, because again, most people sometimes by default conclude that communication is just the passing of information, but actually it's the passing of transformation ultimately, and that's the litmus test for me. How do we relate with one another? That shows who we are, where we are, no? Because it's so easy to just express information without being put to test in relationship with others. No?
Right. Yeah. And then communicating with the self. So there's intrapersonal communication and there's interpersonal communication, and those are mutually interdependent, especially on our process of bhakti, process of transformation, that we're receiving feedback from others, and then we're doing our own sharpening of our inner barometer and understanding where we're at, learning and becoming informed about what's happening in our inner landscape, and then hearing feedback from others and how that internal environment is manifesting into our behavior.
So just for those who may have been hearing this term for the first time, Vrinda-sundari, we would like to tell them what's intrapersonal and interpersonal. Just in case.
Intrapersonal is the self with the self looking at the self in self-realization, the self reflecting on the self, interacting with the self, just like self-management. And then that's intra, and then inter is with others, with other entities.
Thank you. Yeah, that reminds me, in my book also I speak in connection to interfaith dialogue. I also use the word intrafaith dialogue, no, in terms of before talking to people from other traditions and being able to learn from them, first we need to talk with ourselves and with our own tradition, have a deep dialogue. among our own tradition or with ourselves as part of one tradition before we can deal with the other one. And after dealing and learning from other traditions, we are invited to a further intra-faith dialogue. So I always thought in those
Nice.
connections. We have our intra-personal communication, then we are interpersonal, but after the interpersonal comes another layer of intrapersonal dialogue after what we receive from the interpersonal interaction, and so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and practically what interpersonal communication can look like is what are we telling ourselves about ourselves, and what beliefs are we carrying that maybe we're not so conscious about. It's underneath the conscious surface, or we're less than conscious about beliefs that we have about ourselves and others about reality. And what are we telling ourselves about ourselves? And it becomes so clear in, for example, in coaching sessions and I often hear others say, "Oh, when I think like this, then I tell myself this." Right? So this inner dialogue is always happening, either with ourselves or with divinity on a deeper level, and then with reality and how we interact with the world.
You are taking us outside of the comfort zone with these ideas, Vrinda-sundari. I must tell you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I hear you feel uncomfortable.
No. I'm blessed by that. By invoking these notions of making us aware of the deep level of assumptions that we may be having and through which we may be filtering basically reality, and how, going back to your point of pulling the weeds, how one aspect of pulling the weeds will be to increase our awareness of the assumptions through which we are filtering reality. That's also for me a crucial aspect of anartha nibriti. Because sometimes we might think anartha nibriti means I'll chant or I practice and Krishna's just will take off all the contamination, so to say, like automatic process, mechanical. Instead of I need to be introspective, again, intrapersonal, I need to deeply reflect, try to pay attention to what's triggered in me, and thus see that as a window into my unconscious, and to realize what's behind the curtain, which may be scary for some, but it's totally necessary to enter that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Srila Prabhupada is really clear about it in the two verses, and in Chaitanya Charitamrita, how important it is. I mean, it's serious to do both side by side, to cultivate the bhakti like the hearing and chanting, and then he warns. It's actually said there that if we don't pull the weeds, then what happens is the weeds can look just like that bhakti lata creeper. Those unwanted creepers can look just like it, and if we're not able to decipher between which one is which, then we think we're okay, or we think it's okay.
We'll nourish the weeds.
Yeah, and interestingly, those creepers, those unwanted creepers, they're referred to as unwanted behaviors. So, which is interesting, because then when we look at what does it mean to cultivate bhakti, that when Rupa Goswami gives this definition, anushilanam, then he's speaking about, Jiva Goswami expands it further into two meanings of the cultivation of the sentiment of the heart, and then of the engagement and disengagement of the body, mind, and words, speech. So when we're looking at like what are the behaviors, so how is the internal environment manifesting into our behavior?
Yeah, and I appreciate that you are bringing Shastra in this connection, further Shastra, to support our today's episode in terms of Rupa Goswami's definition of Bhakti and Jiva Goswami's commentary on this famous verse which defines Bhakti and Yavilasita Sunyam, etc. Just to make it clear that what we are talking here is not a fancy new agey stuff, but it's rooted in our very tradition, and it's crucial to the stage that most devotees are in now, which is bhajana, kriya, and artha nivriti. and how to engage in bhakti, in spiritual life, with introspection, basically. Ultimately, that's what it's all about. I like to go and further to Shastra to quote Bhagavatam, how Brahma in the very beginning of creation, he hears this word tapa. And I put in my book, tapa can mean also fire, not only austerity. And when Brahma hears tapa, eventually the result is he starts to look inside. He has intrapersonal dialogue. So that's another way of saying introspection. So that's the very first word that comes in creation, introspection, like implying it's all about it. If you're coming here, it's about introspection. So just to show how important this is for everyone who is here, not only for Gaudiya Vaishnavas.
Yeah, and you also refer to fire when you speak about that,
Mhm.
which is interesting because fire is often related to transformation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are to access fire, and it may be burned, but it also will shed light. No, it also has warmth in it. No, but something may need to be burned.
Yeah, and fire transforms. Fire transforms something into another. So it's fire is very characteristic of transformation.
Yeah, and a spiritual life is all about transformation. Which, I mean, just in case I'm clarifying that, in case we forgot that, but we come to spiritual life to be transformed, not to remain the same, as you mentioned, not to water the weeds and make them, like, nourish them and make them seem as, okay, this is spiritual life, this is bhakti, and actually no, there's something to be put into the fire instead of being nourished and make a facade of that so it seems like bhakti. So yeah, I appreciated your referring to that. You want to say something, sir?
Well, I was thinking about when I was in grade school. I was in Catholic school. My family was Catholic, so I was raised in a Catholic tradition, and we would go, I think monthly. I don't remember clearly how often, but we would go during school. We would go to confessional. So we'd walk across from the school building to the church building, and we would go into the church, and we would each sit individually, separately, in pews, and sit quietly and wait for our turn. And I remember my friend on the way, walking across the black pavement parking lot, she asked me, "What are you going to say this time?" Because each time we confess something, like, "Oh, I did this bad thing," and I remember her asking me, like, in a bit of like a joking way,
like trying to be original. Which was the question? Like you have to say something new every time, or in which spirituality?
Well, that was the thing I was thinking. Is her question really like prompted this inquiry in myself, like, I think I'll just say the same thing I always say, which is the same thing that I do every time, and nothing has really changed. I hit my sister. I spoke back to my mom. It's the same thing. So yeah, early on, I remember feeling like, where's the development? Like, where am I going?
Yeah, at least we have to commit higher mistakes. Now, that's how I like to define progress sometimes. It's not that I'll stop making mistakes, but making deeper ones. No, at least have some news in that regard.
Yes. So even when introduced to Krishna consciousness and the practice of bhakti, I was inspired by this promise that in practicing bhakti, I would be transformed, that I would develop myself in a way that I could control my senses, that I could be the master of the self is the master of the self, that I could control anger, that I could conduct myself and actually experience development, like an evolution of spiritual consciousness or evolution of consciousness. And otherwise, like, what's the point of life? Like, I just think, like, being a child, it was experiencing this, experiencing that, but not actually having this active, productive evolution of consciousness. It was more passive. So having actually having an intentional, how do you say it? Like an intentional power, or maybe an agency, to be more developing, to be developing more, to choose to develop more, and that I actually have that agency to develop more and to be more. My pace could actually pick up, and I felt so fulfilled in having that hope, and I experienced that. And then I would say around like 7 years in to my practice, I started feeling a stagnancy again. So it was around that time, maybe a few years of just questioning and looking, that I realized that my behavior is like I was frustrated with my behavior, not following through with what I'm studying, what I say I'm living about, but then my behavior wasn't matching. So what do I do? What do I do about this? So around that time is when I was introduced to transformative communication, and immediately, I was receiving coaching sessions, and then it really invoked this process of introspection, looking at anger and looking at what I believed about myself and all these different things. So, yeah, I think the soul is really yearning to be alive. The soul is alive, but how are we expressing that aliveness in our evolution of consciousness?
A few thoughts that come to mind before we go to what you just mentioned, your experience with transformative communication. But I was thinking when you mentioned your experience with confession, that I know that for some people may be a little, again, may not have the most inspiring memories of that. Of course, in the very root, I think that the spirit of confession is healthy in terms of being honest, sincere, being vulnerable, ideally, and having someone listening empathically. It shouldn't be a mechanical thing. Okay, bring your weekly sins, receive the particular chastisement, or pray which prayers, how many of them you have to do. Okay, I'm clean, I can continue doing sins because I'm clean back. I can go back to my usual habits. But I connected that with actual communication or actual confession has to do with both parts being totally present to one another and vulnerable. The line of Rupa Goswami came to mind, Guhyama Kyati Prichati, like one of the symptoms of love between devotees is to reveal the mind with one another, basically. And how sometimes that confession won't be, again, in terms of something glorious. It can be, of course, some unique mercy that is coming, but also it can be pretty embarrassing. And it's part of the transformation process. That's my point. We were talking about spiritual life. It's about being transformed. We may idealize, okay, transformation, as you mentioned, maybe I will control my mind. I will control many things. I'm not blaming you for saying that. All of us thought like that. But Elodie was still in the control mode. I will control and I will be perfect and I will be transcendental too. And part of the transformation journey is lots of embarrassing, lots of things that I have to become aware of. And we may feel this. I don't like this. This is not this doesn't feel like transformation, although it is. No?
Yeah. I mean, the whole process of going to confession means looking at how have I been behaving? How do I feel about that? And I remember even, it actually prompted that. Yeah, even just the experience of going into the empty church and each of us sitting individually in pews, quiet. Even though like as children we would giggle and like I'd make sure I just look at the floor, or else my friend will catch my eye and we'll laugh. But internally, the experience of what's going on underneath of, oh, what did I do this past month? And I did that thing, and I hurt my sister, and that actually I felt hurt when I hurt her. And do I really want to be in pain? Like, how am I creating pain for others and myself? And do I really want that? It prompted that introspective process. Of course, at the time, I didn't have the words and the facility to actually understand and solidify what was going on, but I can now.
Yeah, and I appreciate that your emphasis on introspection, in terms of, in one sense, introspection could be just translated as thinking, being thoughtful, but sometimes we mistake thinking with having thoughts, which is not the same. No, because we are having thoughts all day. There is an unending parade of stuff going on in our minds. But to think, that's a different function. And I will say, yeah, nowadays sometimes we confuse the two and we say, yeah, I'm thinking, but it's just like uncontrolled parade of thoughts. And actually thinking in this sense will be introspection, which means like taking certain stance at your thoughts, at your emotion, at your actions, and think about them basically. Not just I'm thinking.
Yeah, I like to call it like taking the light of the consciousness, because the consciousness is a symptom of the self, the soul. So when we're actually taking a consciousness, it's like directing. Our consciousness is emanating, right? So we're taking our consciousness and we're actually turning it into the self. So it's like shining a light in toward the self and seeing, oh, I have layers over myself. And what are those layers? What do they look like? And what if I do this instead? Or what, looking.
Yeah, which I will translate as being courageous. To have the courage to do that is like, and the other day the idea came to my mind, the connection between courage, as I try to explain in my book, and vulnerability, because you cannot be courageous unless you are in a vulnerable situation. If one thinks about every time you were courageous in your life, in one sense you are vulnerable, you are exposed to something, and only then you can be courageous. And then I connected with the word encouragement to make a play of word. Encouragement has to do with courage, and courage has to do with vulnerability. So in one way, you cannot have encouragement without proper vulnerability, without the willingness to enter that space where you have to look, to shed light, as you mentioned, at certain directions of where we may be, and being willing to work on that. No, I think you mentioned to me one of these days ago. You mentioned something about the importance of creating a safe container of trust, like through empathic listening as a healing modality, something like that. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I personally find it much safer to introspect and have interpersonal communication than interpersonal communication. So I find that's where the courage really takes place for me, is to speak with others about it, because it takes another level of vulnerability, I find. And so, and Guyam Akyati Prichiti, how are we creating a culture with ourselves and with others in our society of practitioners where we're creating a container where we can actually introspect and then be a supportive modality for each other, to uncover, to have that courage to look at what's there, and then actually even receiving feedback. What I find is fascinating is how much we perceive about each other, even within like minutes of first impression. And that's one thing, like within the seminars, we do feedback processes, and in Savito's 7-day seminar, I don't want to give away too much information, but at the end of the first day, we do some feedback exercises, and it just blows my mind actually how much others can perceive about us by just knowing a complete stranger within 7 hours, just being with them and not even engaging in discussion. But the fact is that we're sentient beings, and that sentience, that I have sentience, you have sentience, and that sentience actually communicates so much with each other.
Yeah, I've had that same experience during the seminar we had a few weeks ago. Like, we were sharing with some of the participants there, and even before 7 hours, after a few minutes, so many things will come about each other that were so accurately real, and we didn't have a clue who we were in one sense. But at the same time, we were connected with each other from the most substantial place possible. So that means you actually have a clue who you are. Beyond all the technical detail, what's your name, where are you from, all that stuff that sometimes we take for knowing who the person is. when
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
it doesn't have to do with that, no? So yeah, and I will connect that with what you mentioned, no? Like, okay, how it's possible that you can get to know so much about other person in minutes? Well, at least my perception of the experience was, in the beginning there was a very safe container of trust and vulnerability constructed, so that allows for both parts to be completely open, because if people is not open to each other, they won't get to know each other in lifetimes, not even in minutes,
Yeah.
in years, lifetimes. So I think that that was a very important contribution by of course Dhira Govinda Prabhu and all the organizers of the particular seminar, like create a safe container for vulnerability to be expressed. And whenever that's in place, everything,
Mhm.
the rest will follow accordingly, and each one will be naked, so to say, in front of one another in terms of vulnerability, and everything will be seen in a very clear and transparent way without the need of a facade of masks, of running away, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do we create that safe container in our relationships as devotees? I mean, one of the biggest, there's a really a nice book about trust, The Speed of Trust, written by the son of the first Stephen Covey, and he talks about how trust, when there's trust among a group, then they're so much more productive, that they're not
Mm-hmm.
tripping up on all these, what is he thinking about me and what I think about them, and then we don't say it, and but to actually create trust. And interestingly, what creates trust and what destroys trust, one of the things that destroys trust is judgmentalism, imposing assumptions on another person, or coming to judgments in a conclusive way, being overly
Mm-hmm.
conclusive about someone, and then just writing it off. It's like a great way of creating a wall. And what I find ironic is, in religious groups, a religious society, judgment tends to be higher,
Mm-hmm.
more prevalent.
Yeah.
So right there, we're sort of undermining our own selves in our practice, in our relationships with each other, by being overly judgmental and not and and not suspending. So to create trust, we can suspend judgment. We naturally, it's a function of the intelligence to make judgments, to
Mm-hmm.
be discerning. So we have that, and we're open to understanding further what's happening for another person. We're open to their evolution. We're open to their development and expansion. We're open. We're not assuming that we know.
Yeah, yeah, that's so. It sounds so commonsensical, and it is,
Yeah.
but it's uncommonsensical, because common sense is generally uncommon sense, and I like to pound that post a little bit, because that's such an important point. That, I mean, generally, there is a very important difference between uh, having a certain perception of a person, of a situation, and making a conclusive statement in our own mind about that person or situation, and being, as you mentioned, assumption, while versus open feedback, so to say. I may relate with you or with anyone and reach certain perception of what's going on. It's unavoidable, as you mentioned, but it's very different than already reaching a conclusion in my mind, and labeling that person according to my prejudice, basically, and putting people in boxes according to what I think they are. Especially, and I appreciate that point you mentioned, in religious circles, there seems to be a higher rate of that. And probably I was thinking the reason may be because we have so many absolute statements, absolute conceptions, like transcendental and absolute and conclusive, according to our faith and experience. Okay, this is the truth, this is God, this is the perfect way of doing things, so we take this like absolutistic take on reality, and we mix that with our assumptions and prejudices, and we become
Yeah.
a social danger, basically, because we project now we reinforce our assumptions and prejudices with this absolutistic taste, and we are just concluding about everything, and we can become, of course, fundamentalists and all the things that we see in religious people, in many cases at least.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wanted to
Yeah.
emphasize that point, because it's, I mean, probably almost nobody's free from that, but it's at least to bring awareness to the fact that probably we are doing that. The scriptures say, "Anmavam manjate jagat." You see the world as you see yourself, and you just filter everything. So I think it's a healthy, as you mentioned, the suspension of judgment, which is somehow what I write in my book in the chapter of divine ignorance, like a way of coexisting with ignorance or unknowing is not to be so sure
Yeah.
and to rush so quickly about what we think is going on outside of us, but just to remain coexisting with uncertainty and unknowing and not be so sure about everything, but allow things to unfold and show us as they actually are.
Mhm.
Mm.
Or to understand that it's a partial truth.
Yeah.
Like, it's a partial truth. It's not an absolute truth. That my experience is a partial truth. Like, there's truth in my experience. There
Hmm.
could be truth in my discernment and my perspective and my experience of someone, and it's
Mm.
partial.
Mm.
It could be a
Yeah.
totally different experience for someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, in a spiritual tradition, we deal with absolute truth, but sometimes we merge the two, and our partial truths become absolute truth because I'm quoting Shastra to justify my point, or I'm part of this group who worships the absolute. So whatever comes to me is also absolute.
Yeah.
And your idea of partial truth recall me. Richard Rohr uses this terminology that I appreciate. He says, there is my story, there is our story, and there is the story. No? So there's what I experience, my partial truth, what I can
Yeah.
see in the picture. There's what we perceive our story as human, community, family, group, and there's the story, the bigger picture, the absolute
Mm-hmm.
truth. And again, as you mentioned, we should never be too sure that we
Right.
are already encompassing absolute truth, encompassing this story with our particular perspective or
Mm-hmm.
words or experience.
But it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that only the absolute story is true. It means all the other stories are true also.
Yeah, are
You know?
included in the
Then
absolute story.
yeah.
I mean, part of it, although as partial as that may be, again, as you mentioned, they have their
Mm-hmm.
validity.
But the danger, there's a danger in having or assuming that I have a monopoly on the truth. That
Oh yeah,
because of my understanding of scriptures and because I'm engaging in the highest path, that I have
yeah,
the monopoly on the truth. I mean, even Bhaktivinode Thakura, I find it so interesting how he says, I think it's in the Krishna Samhita, where he says,
hmm,
you know, some believe that the world was created for this, some believe it was created for this, some people it was created for this. And in actuality, our human intelligence, it's not even possible to understand with our
hmm,
intelligence.
yeah,
It's only understandable through samadhi, and he repeats that. But
mm,
even we think, oh, yes, I know samadhi. Like, can we even really admit that we? I mean, to just know that, like, yeah, I'm limited in my perspective, even as even if I am completely pure and clear. I
mm,
my existence is a slice of the whole. And we look at it like Om Purnam, we're all parts and parcels, and we're perfect and complete as an individual, as a part of the
mm,
collective. The whole collective is perfect and complete, the perfect whole. And I'm a partial reality
hmm,
of the whole reality.
hmm,
My perspective is a partial reality of the whole reality.
hmm, yeah, yeah. That's basically what I will define as humility. No, to acknowledge that fact, basically, to live from that
Mm-hmm.
place of not being too sure about anything, which doesn't mean that, oh, I'm losing my faith. It's just on the contrary, I'm increasing my faith and I'm realizing how reality is ever expanding and how I can just touch one point in an infinite line. And I have to remain open for astonishment and wonder, because as the scriptures say, Rasasar Chamatkar, the essence of the juice of life is wonder, astonishment. Now here Gail
Mm-hmm.
Rasangi Lewis is commenting in that connection. She says, being curious about others, no, like
Mm-hmm.
keeping the curiosity spirit, because if not, we just become too conclusive. Everything fits into the corresponding box, and we may end up with a dictatorship, so to say. Everything
Yeah.
is perfectly in place, no place for wonder, no place for uncertainty, unknown. So
Discovery.
yeah, exactly. So, Vrinda-sundari, you were mentioning connecting to the topic of transformative communication and empathy and vulnerability. I'd like to, if you, something that comes to mind, if we can share some words on the idea of listening, because we were talking about building a safe container for
Okay.
people to feel safe enough to be open and naked, and probably a lot of that has to do with listening, which is a crucial part of communication, because sometimes we tend to interpret communication as I'm talking, not even the other person
Yeah.
talking, me talking. That's to communicate, to say what I have to say so you understand me. No, and that's not communication at all. It mostly it's about listening more than talking. So I don't know what we would like to say to begin with about like the notion of listening.
Right. Well, the aspect of communication, or the part in communication that where miscommunication or communication breakdown happens most often is in the decoding. So it's in the listening. And yeah, and Guyam Akiti Prichiti, we're listening in confidence, and I see that as we're listening with openness and in a we have a generosity and a compassion. So being open, hearing someone without, I'm not going to go and speak this to another person. I'm not thinking like, how can I listen in such a way that I can use this against them in the future? Like, what am I doing how am I serving this person through listening? So seeing actually listening as a service, and that in deep listening, empathic listening, we're meeting a person with understanding. So when someone is going through an experience, the human experience, which is meant for self-realization, it's designed for self-realization, we're creating this container of listening and confidence, where that person is processing what's happening in their human experience for self-realization. So it's not only that person is shining the light of their consciousness on their own self in their process, but also my consciousness, I'm shining my light focused completely that this is the most important thing that's happening right now for me is this person's process. And so I'm shining my light of consciousness onto them and their process and their processing. And then that combined light, how I see it, is that combined light is illuminating for them, and then they can see even more. When you, for example, reflective listening it's a tool, and it's a way of actually shining the light on that person's process. So I hear you say this, I'm hearing you say this, and I'm also sensing that you're experiencing frustration with yourself, and then that person looking like, it is frustration that I'm feeling, and I'm also experiencing some like depression. So to just uncover the layers with that illuminating process. And it's healing. The light is healing. The light is healing because it's shining into the dark places.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciated what you mentioned, like listening as a service, because and we have that in our own tradition. When Bhakti, the Angas, the expressions of Bhakti are described, interestingly, it begins with Shravan. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, and so on. So Shravanam means to hear. Also, we may take it like to hear the Bhagavatam, to sit and hear a class. And we may not take Shravanam also to listen, like to learn, as you are describing also. And personally, I I like to include this idea in Shravan, not only to hear the class or Harikatha from someone, but also learning to listen in a fully present, empathic, compassionate way. I recall when I was in the Satotop seminar, the Govinda Prabhu quote Paul Tillich. That was a great quote. I didn't know that one. If I would have known, I would have included that in my book. And he said basically, the first duty of love is to listen. And I was like, wow. And again, Shravan for us, that's the first. After all the other stages of all these practices of bhakti. It all begins by proper paying attention. I mean, if I love you, I will listen to you. Or if I want to love you, at least I will be willing to listen. If I'm not willing to listen, basically I do not I'm sending the message that I don't care. So that was an important, powerful point for me. Like, and for us, yeah, you ultimately in our particular tradition as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, our ultimate goal of life entails so much listening and so much communication. When Radha and Krishna are in the Lila and they are talking with one another with different nuances and intricate meanings in between, and they are talking and listening and talking. So if we want to enter that realm and serve in that realm of communication, we have to start the training, of course, right here among ourselves. So I
Yeah.
appreciated your emphasis on hearing and how hearing can be transformative and can help the one who is talking to receive more light. As you mentioned, hearing sheds some light. The one who is open, the one who is vulnerable talking is shedding light by his her vulnerability. But sometimes an extra light is required, and that will come by the vulnerable person who is also hearing. Because if you are vulnerable talking, you can only connect with that vulnerability by being yourself vulnerable while hearing.
True.
So the
Yeah.
two combined vulnerabilities are two combined lights, which help to shed light on whatever needs to be shed light on. So that was powerful. I appreciated that.
Yeah.
And yeah, tell me.
Yeah, I mean, and Radha Krishna, Radha and Krishna are communicating in such high level ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's so intricate that what they're saying is not what they're really saying, but they're saying something else. Like it's the complete opposite of the lowest level communication in this realm,
Yeah,
right? Where
yeah.
someone says something, but they didn't really say it. Like they're not being straightforward. They can't figure out what they meant when they said that, and maybe it means this. And there's a whole drama going on in my mind. Like it's like the lowest level of communication is not communicating. But that's the reflection of Radha Krishna is communicating. They're saying one thing, but they're actually saying another. You have to be quite developed in your
Yeah,
communication to understand what's actually happening.
yeah,
The
yeah.
intricacies of communication.
Yeah, because if you are thrown suddenly to that realm without being proficient in that, you go crazy because you don't know what's going on, what they are actually saying. Everyone else is getting it, but you won't. So the point, I like to connect this thing with the higher realm and where we are, just to make this correspondence between where we want to go, but what's going on in that place, and how we should qualify ourselves right now to entering into that place through the
Yeah.
daily situations that we go through, that we may call ordinary situations.
Yeah.
But they are not ordinary as such. They are totally qualifying us for the most extraordinary type of experience, so to say. So it's important for me to establish some correlation between the two. So we don't think, oh, that's so divine and transcendental, and this has nothing to do with that. No, actually, as you
Right.
mentioned, dealing with your own emotions or with other people's inner world in these terms has a very, very deep correlation with the ultimate converging point of the Leela, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And you just won't make it there. Like
Yeah.
Prabhupada says in the purport and about pulling the weeds, he says if the devotee does not pull the weeds, they just won't make it there.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. When I say, of course, if you go there and you are not ready, you won't be able to fit there. It's a way of saying you will never get
Yeah.
there, of course, to begin with.
But
But I think it's important that we play out the implications of what it means for us to enter the Vrindavan Leela in our tradition. Which are the
right.
implications of that, and how we have to play out the implications here and now. Probably a beginning point is communication, and a beginning point of communication is, as you mentioned, vulnerability and empathic listening, and helping one another to see what's going on by listening.
Yeah.
So much power is there.
Well, I think that I've seen it
Mm-hmm.
in the practitioners that where we think, well, I can continue hearing and chanting, and then everything else will follow.
Mm-hmm.
So I continue hearing and chanting, and I'll go and join, the eternal
But what's
pastimes.
what's hearing again?
Yeah.
And what's chanting, of course, as well. But yeah, I will add hearing to listening, because again, hearing is not just I sit mechanically in a class and whatever is being said, I'm always incorporating it in the proper way. I mean, you need to understand what's going on. It's not just hearing. You have to process what you're hearing, to accept, to discern, to put into practice, to realize. I mean, there is a
Hmm.
whole sequence to that. But yeah, I agree that listening and hearing is a good beginning point. You were sorry, you want to say something?
Well, yeah, there are, when, how do I say this? There are different phases of change or development. There's
Mm-hmm.
standard phases of development and change. And if we're always alive in self-realization, then whatever we're
Mm.
hearing is valuable for us. Whatever experience we have, even as a listener or as someone who's expressing, and everything's alive. So yeah, I'll just add that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I will say that also because let's be honest, for many people this is terrifying. Just to be naked, to be vulnerable, to be known. This is how to say, like, to speak about the unspeakable. So to say about those stuff that is unpleasant. Uh,
Yeah.
but again, it's how to make that thing that is terrifying and unpleasant possible. uh, I will connect it with this point of being witnessed by someone who is unconditionally present there. Which is not so
Mm.
easy. Again, as you mentioned, it's not just like, okay, I will be an unconditional hearer for you. It's not like I press a button, I'm already there. It's a training, so to say. You need to really
Yeah.
practice unconditional hearing. It's not like an automatic function. Okay, I will hear now. Now I will talk. Now I will do. I mean, it requires so much training, and it's okay not to discourage anyone. It's good to
Mm.
measure that. To be a good hearer, I mean, that can take a lifetime, and that can be so healing.
Yeah.
Hearing can be so healing, but yeah, you need to
Mm.
train your heart and your ear for that to happen. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And for someone to build that, to experience safety and being heard, and then
Mhm.
that increased safety, that feeling of safety, then one can, in being received, and being
Yeah,
heard, and being
yeah,
understood,
yeah.
and that the need to be understood is a deep need. So feeling understood, feeling safe, and being vulnerable, then it builds up a courage to be more vulnerable next time, to be more vulnerable. And so it seems like a lot of us practitioners have not been received in a safe way, and so we're afraid to be vulnerable,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then that can in turn stunt our development. So we're afraid, but when we have this experience of being received in safety, and then we can actually be confident and grow out of that, grow security, feel safe, and then from that be even more vulnerable. So when someone isn't confidential, when I share honestly, I'm able to handle it more because I'm accustomed to I'm accustomed to feeling secure in my vulnerability.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and as I mentioned, I remember in my book again. Of course, vulnerability is so necessary, but again, if you don't have proper boundaries to express vulnerability, you can feel terrified, and that can end up in abuse. So it's so
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
to provide the support and the empathy and the unconditionality for the person getting naked in front of you, so to say. Doesn't feel like,
Yeah.
this will end up in trauma, but this will end up in
Mm-hmm.
empowerment. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And I was thinking when you were describing the ideal spirit for the hearer, is somehow representing what Krishna is doing with us. Krishna is looking at us unconditionally, lovingly, hearing us. But of course, sometimes we may lose sight of that. So we need that to be more embodied in front of us in the form of someone who is representing uh, God's own stance toward us in terms of supporting us, accompanying us. So again, whatever it comes from in connection with God Himself or with some person, we need, as you mentioned, to feel ourselves understood, supported, because if not, yeah, it can be
Yeah,
completely overwhelming.
right. Yeah, as a listener, to meet the person and the experience that they're expressing, to meet them with
Mhm.
understanding and compassion, it requires for the listener to have met oneself with understanding and compassion. And in my experience, that compassion came from becoming more developed in my practice, and like more developed in my devotional sentiment. So
Mhm.
that helps with the compassion part. And then understanding myself, instead of like, why am I getting angry? It's so bad to be angry. It's lusty to be angry. It must mean I'm lusty, right? But to see like, oh, I'm feeling angry about this. Actually, it's really about this. And so that the whole process of introspection and meeting oneself with understanding. So then I know when someone else is expressing something, I understand. I have an understanding, like an actual understanding of what it feels like.
Mhm.
Because even though the circumstances are different, the experience is generally the same. The experience of anger, the experience of being human. And so I can meet them with understanding and compassion. And then from that point, actually, transformation happens. So as soon as we accept something, then we can change it. But if we go straight to something and just change it, it doesn't work. The transformation actually happens when we go meet it with understanding.
Yeah, it's not so much going beyond, but going through. No, like as you mentioned, accepting instead of transcending. Actually, actual transcendence has to do with it begins with a radical acceptance, what I like to call, and you touched upon an important point, which is, okay, I'm having certain emotions, and that plays it out in a lot in communication, in relationships. Me or the other person is going through some emotion, and especially with the in our tradition, and any other tradition, we have all this like self-imposed judgment on, okay, I'm feeling this, I shouldn't be feeling this is not correct, this is a symptom of conditioned soul, this is wrong, I should be feeling this. So we kind of develop, we lack, as I put in my book, we don't develop intimacy with our emotions, but actually we quickly put them in boxes, and most of them are condemned basically. We are not accepting them for what they are. So uh, and I think that's an important point for us to realize that. And I quoted in my book even things from the Bhagavatam and Prabhupada saying, even an enlightened soul will be angry at times. That's not something that won't happen. We over idealize. Okay, being advanced means being non-emotional, basically. And interestingly, our ultimate goal is full of emotion. So again, if our
Yeah.
ultimate goal is all about bhava or emotion, if we as practitioners are developing some like anti-emotional stance, how we will end up in the actual goal we want to attain.
No,
So
it's like putting parts of the self into boxes in like different corners in the room. And then we end up being this like half, like dilapidated half person.
mm,
But when we actually take all of those parts and bring them like closer into the self, like moving closer in and looking at
mm,
all of them, then they naturally become integrated, purified by being integrated.
mm, exactly.
So I was feeling that like 10 years ago. I was feeling like, oh, this part of myself I don't like, it's bad. And this part of myself I don't like, it's bad. This part's good. And then
Mm,
I felt like this like chopped up entity.
mm,
It felt so misaligned with what bhakti actually is. It felt so not loving. And I was thinking, how can I do this to myself? As a parent, like when I remember when I heard my son say something about himself, like he said, like, I don't really like this about myself. And it hurts so deeply as a
mm,
mother to hear him say
mm,
that. Like, how can you say that about yourself? You're amazing. And just think like Krishna's watching me, like Oh,
Yeah,
bad.
it hurts so much probably because we think the same way about ourselves still, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Here, someone is saying that connection, disintegrated self versus integrated self. No, because you are talking about integrating the emotions. No, and I also talk about that in the book. Transcendence is integration, not rejection of anything, but proper
Mm-hmm.
integration. But if you don't have integration, you have disintegration, and disintegration means apocalypse. Everything is over. It's
Mm-hmm.
not transcendent.
Yeah. And when I was reading how Bhaktivinode Thakura was reflecting on Rupa Goswami's Anushilanam and how Jiva Goswami broke it down into two. And then I was speaking with a friend and he was saying, and then Visvanatha Cakravarti breaks that down into three categories. And Bhaktivinode Thakura is saying, he says that the emotions are an expansion of the self. And so the emotions at every stage of existence are always present. So to divorce ourselves from our emotions is it's I guess from a manager's mind, like someone who wants production. It's inefficient and ineffective. It's not effective, it's not productive, and it's not efficient. And if we really actually are interested in becoming perfected beings, if we actually want to develop love for Krishna, then we have to really dive in. And I know, like you're saying, this it can feel really terrifying for some people to put themselves in that. So, but it's so refreshing to be able to just integrate and to be an integrated being, and to develop this security, a sense of security and safety and wholeness, and to just move into bhakti in a very whole way.
Yeah, yeah. Not only holy, but whole. No? Our holiness
Mm-hmm.
must include our wholeness, because if not, in the name of holiness, we are becoming dysfunctional, basically, unhuman. Uh, we have to integrate humanity with transcendence, and being human means having certain emotions. And our ultimate prospect is to be fully human and fully divine. It's not that our ultimate life in Lila is no more humanity, only divinity. And we have to be fully human there. So we won't never be fully
Yeah.
human if we are not being as human as we can here and there. So yeah, I appreciate this completely. It's freedom, basically, when you allow yourself to go through those experiences without the label, without the weeping, without the
Yeah.
prejudice of you shouldn't be feeling that, that's wrong. I mean, that's the voice of fear, that's the voice of prejudice, that's the voice of dogma, or that's the voice of, yes, I mean, maturity, that we understood certain things or certain way, or they were presented to us in certain way without wanting to blame anyone. But sometimes we must acknowledge, sometimes we receive the type of narrative, like transcendence means do not feel this, do not do that, do not do that. And it's served for some time in some way, but eventually we need to go to the do's, to how to deal with that thing by allowing that. No, like I put in my book,
Mm-hmm.
actually there are no bad emotions, there are only bad things we do with our emotions. And that
Yeah.
calls for more responsibility, actually, because it's easy to say those are the bad emotions, so you avoid them. No, they're
Mm-hmm.
bad, be careful of them. And instead of saying no emotion is bad, but you have responsibility on how you embrace each emotion. So that's more
Mm-hmm.
challenging. It demands more responsibility, but that demands more, invites for more growth and progress also.
Yeah. And then to see the emotions as signals or signs,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this is a signal for me to pay attention. There's something important here. What's going on?
Hmm.
Because, oh,
Yeah.
this emotion is coming up. Like, what's this about? This is a signal for me to look.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
happening with this? Why is this really important?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when someone asked Carl Jung about the unconscious. We talked about a little bit before. Okay, one speaks about the unconscious, but how to make the unconscious conscious, how to become aware of the unconscious. And he will say, begin with paying attention to certain emotions that are triggered in you at particular moments. So why every time this
Mm,
happens, this particular emotion comes? That's speaking about something unconscious, probably. But again, you have to allow that to happen. You have to accept the experience,
yeah.
accept the emotions, go through the motions of that, the motions of the emotions, without feeling bad about you. Again, you are embracing your humanity and integrating so many things.
Mm-hmm.
Let me share one comment that I'm seeing here. It's connected with something we talked a little while ago, but I think it's worth sharing, and you can share a few words on that if you want, Vrinda-sundari. This comes from Jamanuya, and she's saying how to deal with all the history before now between many divisions of Bhakti practitioners and all of them having their own partial realities. Second generations, we have to deal with all those second generation devotees, we have to deal with all those partial realities. Is it that we cannot be conclusive then with anything and giving the space to everyone to have their realities? Sometimes this space can be a bit overwhelming for those in the middle of those realities. My English is not good. I hope you get what I mean.
Mm.
So, any thoughts on that, Vrinda-sundari?
Yeah.
How to accommodate all this idea of partial reality, and we cannot be conclusive about anything, or yes, how to be conclusive without becoming like narrow-minded, and how to
I think
yeah advise those who are
what's
in
the
the midst of
matter?
those. Sorry.
Right. Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, the principles. So we need to be clear about what we're conclusive about. What are we conclusive about?
Mm-hmm.
So conclusive about absolute truths versus partial truths, and conclusive about principles, and understanding that the principles are manifested in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
The principles are manifested in partial realities. So to understand, like, what am I being conclusive about, and what am I not? So there are absolute truths, and we can be conclusive about those. And then interacting with those as a second generation. Yeah, I'm experiencing her comment and wanting to choose carefully how to say it. I can relate to the experience of interacting with those who are senior to me, and having their perspective, them expressing their perspective to me, and having that happen with a variety of different personalities. So I appreciate being in contact with all different practitioners, devotees who are senior to me, and I appreciate hearing their perspectives. And I also experience sometimes this feeling of being in the middle of it, and each of them feeling right, and more right than the other. And it gives it's an interesting perspective to be in the middle, where this person really feels convicted that they're right and that their partial reality is the absolute, and this one, who has a very different perspective, feels that their partial reality is the absolute truth. And it's kind of comical, actually, because I say, well, that one and then that one, but you're both feeling really right and absolute about your partial reality. So yeah, I think, like you might have said,
Excuse me. The microphone is sounding a little strange. I don't know if it's the microphone, something got unplugged. Yeah, it's making some. Yeah, it's making sound like distorted sound or something. Yeah,
Okay.
just now, not before that. So I don't know if something was moved or something was changed or something, or
Is it still doing it?
yeah, a lot.
Then I'm gonna take it out.
Yeah, it may work better. Let's see. Can you talk? I cannot hear you now. I don't know if you can like configure another microphone, the one from the computer. I cannot hear you now yet because it was very distorted.
Now do you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, without distortion. Sorry to interrupt, but it was getting more and more distorted.
Oh, okay.
But we can hear you nice now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that I'll just share myself personally, that I've seen that part of my service as a junior in my relationship with those that are senior to me, and being in a position where I hear different perspectives from different seniors, who feel very clearly that their take on reality is the conclusive truth. That I'm present with them as a listener, and I take their perspective into consideration seriously, and I appreciate their perspective, and it's up to me as my own individual entity and autonomous being on my own path of spiritual life, who's responsible for my own spiritual life, to harmonize all those things. And so when I am relating with someone, I'm simply present with them in their sharing of their experience, and for them it's conclusive.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was thinking, even when we say, okay, we can be conclusive about absolute truths, and in one sense, yeah, of course, we will say, as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, let's say Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead and the soul is eternal. But at the same time, there are differences of opinion in eternity. So we have also to accommodate that, no?
Yeah.
Because we may have this idea of, okay, there's a point where we agree on everything, and that means absolute truth. And then you suddenly realize, I don't know, if you go to Vaikuntha, the inhabitants of Vaikuntha will think Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. No? So we are not thinking that same way here. Or if you go to Golok, as I like to say, you will find, okay, Yashoda puts Krishna to bed at night, and she wants him to have sound sleep the whole night. But Sri Radha doesn't want that. She wants Krishna to sneak away and met her for Rasa Leela. So they have differences of opinion in eternity, but they love each other. Radha loves Yashoda loves Radha. So my point is, this eternal situation is showing us that's absolute truth. There's difference of opinion, but they love each other. No? So I think that's also a challenge for us in terms of transformative communication. Not only because we can say, well, we agree that we disagree, and that can be invoked in a very easy, quick, and dismissive and cheap way. But also there's place for agreeing to disagree. But on top of that, how to increase my affection for those I disagree with. I will say that's a challenge, to keep loving those I'm disagreeing with. If the disagreement is, again, it's in the basis of proper communication.
Yeah, it seems to take a sense of security. Like, what is it about the individuals in the highest realm interacting with Krishna together and having those different perspectives? It's all based on their own deep security in their relationship with Krishna. So similarly here, when we are secure in our practice and we trust ourselves, and we're humble in knowing that we're limited, then we can cultivate a security where we can hear varying perspectives and not feel flustered.
Yeah. Security. Yeah, and security sometimes can be mistaken as you are overconfident, or sometimes, now unfortunately, that's even criticized, like, okay, that's arrogance. No, well, actually, actual security has nothing to do with that. It comes from this deep, vulnerable, humble place of knowing who you are, knowing who Krishna is, but remaining vulnerable. So that has a lot to do with humility. So it cannot be arrogant at all. So I will say those who mistake actual security for arrogance, they are not too secure themselves, basically.
Yeah,
So
like we have security guards.
Yeah, in their insecurity, they will attack whatever is mirroring their own lack of security, basically.
Right. Yeah, it's like we have a bunch of security guards with machine guns at our door. You know, we have an alarm system and like dangerous dogs barking. It's different kind of security. It's a deepened place. Like the ocean is so deep that even though there's ripples on the top, there's no disturbance. So we're very grounded and connected and deep. Then whatever's happening, we can be stable.
There's one question here from Adara Lila that I'd like to share and also hear some of your thoughts, Vrinda-sundari. She's asking, I have a question about how to relate to the emotions of others. How do we honor the emotions of others without getting caught up in them? I find it hard to balance between being cold and putting up boundaries and being empathetic and getting overwhelmed by other feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to share some of your experience? I will say, since you are very much involved into this uh, area, basically, and so how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a development. It's a cultivation. So my experience is that when one is present with one's own emotions and is able to really show up and be present in that area inside oneself, then the more we do that, then the easier it is to be fully present or to be partially present with another person in their emotions. That's the simple answer, but it takes time. That's the thing. Like when we first moved to Denver, I was the wife of the temple president, and somehow everyone had all their definitions, and all the definitions were different of what wife of meant. And but one predominant definition meant by default, I was the person that people would go to complain about the temple president. So I wanted to hear them and receive them, and I had no tools or practice in how to do that. And it was so overwhelming, especially to hear someone criticize my husband. So,
yeah, I was going to tell you that because the temple president happens to be your husband, right?
Yeah, it's so ironic.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, like, maybe I could just tell them, don't talk to me. And I did. Sometimes I said, just talk straight to him. Many people were afraid to speak directly to him. So I actually started receiving coaching around this. That was the whole point of me even getting into transformative communication, was so that I could understand how to listen. Because I had experience previously where I remember one devotee that was temple president, I was sharing my opinion about something, and he said, your opinion doesn't matter. And I remember thinking, that really feels demeaning. I feel really not valuable right now. Okay. And so then I was thinking, I want to be able to receive others and hear them. So that meant it wasn't just some like management tools. It actually meant me going deeper into myself and meeting myself and my own emotions. And that was hard for me because I grew up with a mother who said, you're being too emotional. Don't be so emotional, which was like, emotion is bad. So for me to actually show up for myself, for me to show up with others and meant showing up for myself. And it's a cultivation. It takes time. It takes development. Just like 2 weeks ago, we had Snana Yatra here, and the devotees were taking Jagannath Baladev Subhadra over, who caught a cold after snan and after being bathed, and they were walking over to their quarters, and I ran out of the temple to walk over, and I noticed that one of the neighbors on the street, she was sitting there on the ledge in front of her lawn, and she was angry, and she had her arms crossed like this, and she was angry, and she was sitting next to another woman who was older than her. And I saw one devotee approach her and try to distribute a book to her, and it made her more angry. And I was thinking, what's going on? So I sort of wandered over, and I made eye contact with her, and she said, someone parked their car in front of my driveway. This happens so often, practically every Sunday, and I'm tired of you guys. And here are the devotees, they're like in bliss, across the street at the one house residential place that the devotees bring Jagannath, and she's so angry and she's hating the devotees, and they're in bliss, and the devotees are like, here's a book, distributing a book to her, right? She doesn't care. And I looked straight at her, and I said, you're so angry with us right now. You're so angry. And she said, yeah, I am angry. I'm angry because this and this. And I was like, yeah, it's so understandable that you're angry right now. Like you can't leave, your car's blocked, and here we are being so oblivious, and we actually are treating you like we don't care and you don't matter. No, and she was like, she felt so received by it that immediately there was transformation. She felt heard, she felt received, and she just calmed down, and she was like, thank you for listening to me. I had 3 people, like 3 of you guys, approach me and completely ignore me. So her interpretation of how they interacted with her, because I'm sure they interacted with her, interpretation was they ignored me.
Yeah, and you took responsibility of what's going on. I mean, you took responsibility for your side, and that helped her to take responsibility for her own emotions.
Yeah,
No?
I mean, by that time,
I was thinking, yeah. When you were acknowledging, yeah, I can understand what you are feeling because we ignored you, so we took that helped her so much. Okay, yes, I'm feeling like that, and like owning her experience, you are owning yours, and that's how, again, transformation occurs. So yeah, I totally agree, and I totally agree what you mentioned about the time alchemy, we can call, no, like the how I mean, we need time for these things for us to acquire expertise in those situations. I can recall my own situation as a sannyasi or as a leader of community for decades, and I'm looking back for the last 10, 15 years and how I was trying, as you mentioned, to deal with situation without proper tools, with the best intention, for sure. But best intention, I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, they said also, right?
yeah.
And I knew, almost 80, 90% of the problems in relationships have to do with communication issues. I could feel that, intuit that, and I was trying to do my best in trying to hear and be present and reciprocate. But of course, still there were lots of things that I was missing, and it was the best I could offer at that time. But I needed decades of not only experience, but as you mentioned, also learning, training, hearing from others with more experience, incorporating new notions. And the other day I was giving, because I like 10 years ago, we gave in Argentina once in a temple, in a farm I was the temple president at, we make a seminar of nonviolent communication from Marshall Rosenberg. I'm sure you know about him. And it was great. I was reading the notes and everything, and we were all moved by that. But now, 10 years after, I look back in the notes and I was like, what was I understanding at that time about this? No? I mean, it was nice for us 10 years ago, but now I changed so much and everything changed so much. And now I'm finding these same patterns of, I don't know, observe without judging, and learn to identify, express your feelings, and whatever, recognize your own feelings, take responsibility for them from a very different perspective. But again, time was required.
Yeah, and I get it's challenging because we want it right now. Being patient with ourselves as we grow, and when we become familiar with the energy of different emotions, and we're present with them more often, then we just naturally get more comfortable. Like, I know when I started really doing this process, looking at anger was my go-to emotion for practically everything. And so when I looked more closely at anger, it was an amazing discovery that, previously I was thinking anger is just lust. But then I realized like anger is about protection. Anger is about boundaries. Anger for me is about personal power. It's about agency. And I could see that there was so much self-discovery when I was present with anger. And now, like, the feeling of anger, the energy of anger, it's so familiar, and it's like a friend now. Oh, it's not an enemy. So similarly, when we're more familiar with certain emotions, and we become comfortable with them inside ourselves, and we sort of look at them, that they become friendly. So then when we meet others in that, of course, it's more difficult with people that we're closest with, closely connected with. But to meet someone in that and to know that energy, it doesn't ruffle our feathers so much, and it there's surface level agitation, sort of as a naturally, but it doesn't rock our boat.
Yeah, I appreciate what you mentioned about anger as your friend, in the sense that reminds me of Bhagavad Gita 6:6, with Krishna saying, your mind can be your worst enemy or it can be your best friend. And anger is an emotion, and emotions take place in the mind. So it's another way of saying you can make your mind a friend, means you can make all of your emotions or your emotional gamut a friend. So that in potential, of course. But again, for that to happen, you have to be willing to coexist with them and get to know each other, for sure.
Yeah, that's what it means to engage and disengage the body, mind, and words. And that's what it means, that we're managing the mind. And the mind means the emotions. So
control the mind doesn't mean don't have emotions, don't have anger. Control the mind means make friends with anger and everything else, which is more challenging.
And to
Love
disengage. Like, how are we? Oh, I'm going to disengage anger from here, and I'm going to use it here.
Yes, we mentioned it's all about integrating and recycling instead of rejecting and putting under the rug, so to say. No. Vrinda-sundari, a few words, because we have talked, and with this, we may be entering into the last section of our talk about the Sattva Top Foundation and the Sattva Top seminars, because we have been talking about that, but I mean, we are familiar with that on some level, at least myself, but some people don't have yet an idea of what's the Sattva Top. So I wanted just to make mention of that, and of course extend the recommendation for those who would like to have an experience of it. I had it a few weeks ago, and it was very, very inspiring in Denver. And I have my own highlights of the experience. I mean, I was very surprised that, happily surprised, many things that were talked about that I was already talking about in my book. So I was like, wow, so beautiful that without knowing each other, we reached these similar places and conclusions. That's so confirming about this intuition need to reach those places. Like, I don't know, meta communication, for example, importance of going beyond what's being said and all that's being said in every sense of the term, of, or as you mentioned before, the need for honest feedback, no? Because we are surrounded by so much non-honest feedback, whether in the form of criticism or praise. At least me as a sannyasi can tell there's lots of that exaggerated in both directions. And we need honest feedback to keep us sane, basically, to not go crazy. So that those are some highlights. Like, for example, also the using the I term to own your feelings. How many times we used to express what we feel in terms of we, us, in plural, like as an unconscious way of not taking full responsibility for them. And of course, at the same time, that we are not responsible for other people's experience, which we used to fall so many times in that direction. And that's such a baggage for us, extremely. Anyhow, some thoughts I'm sharing. There are so many other highlights that I could share, but a few words in connection to Sattva, if you would like to share a few words in that connection.
I started working with Sattva. Actually, I was trained in transformative communication or transformative coaching in 2015. I took the training, and like I said, that it opened up so much for me in my journey of self-realization that I actually retook the training so I could stay absorbed and develop myself further. And then I was staffing that online training. So there is an online training for transformative coaching to become a certified transformative coach. And then they also offer seminars. So I fly Dear Govinda Prabhu out here to conduct Savatov Foundational Seminar at Harmonious Sanctuary. And so that was one of my intentions for Harmonious Sanctuary, was to create a safe space for a safe container and for devotees and or undiscovered devotees, for practitioners of all different types to jump into that experience. And It's highly experiential, so it's also intense. It's an intensive. We start in the morning and we go all the way till the evening, and there are breaks. And as you remember, the breaks are...
And for the clarification, yeah. That's the first thing I asked when you told me it's 12 hours per day, 3 days. Are some breaks in between? Yes. So very, very well placed, very well placed breaks, but also very well placed intensity, immersion.
Yeah, and it's designed to be that way, because it's designed to break down, and it's similar to other personal development seminars and intensives. So yeah, the first day of the foundational is empathy exercises, a lot of experiential exercises to develop empathy. It's the first day, and then the second day is how we relate to others, and then it's focused on our relationships, like what's getting in the way of our relationships, or of empathic, clean communication and relationship. And then on the third day, then we look more at the intrapersonal communication. What am I telling myself about myself? How am I relating to myself? And then from that, how do I want to bring this into my life? So I organize 2 Sabbatoh foundationals at the Harmless Sanctuary twice, 2 a year. And then, of course, then there's the second level, which is a 7-day training, which is more, it's more focused on intrapersonal, very focused on intrapersonal.
Yeah, I've heard the glories of that one, and I've been even kindly invited by you to do that one. The next one you will have, but unfortunately, I already was, organized to be in India for that time, but I look forward to that second complementary experience for sure. Here I'm sharing a link for the website of Sattva Tov, just in case, for those of you who would like to know more. It's Sattva Tov with only one T, Sattva Tove with E at the end, sattvatov.com, for those who are listening. So yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, further introduction to Sattva Tov, which I think it's very important. And again, for those who may be thinking, oh, so much time you're investing in communication and learning to hear and talking. This sounds like tedious, and this is like lots of time. Actually, on the contrary, I mean, you will lose so much more time if you don't work on these things. You will have so much headaches and problems and conflicts and big stuff if you just want to save time by not developing our communication skills. So it's not a loss of time, but it's an investment for eternity, basically, because as we mentioned, in eternity that will be so much required, as we already shared.
Yeah, well, it's more like, where are we putting our energy? So it's more like putting energy and time into a place that expands energy and time. It ultimately that we're becoming more efficient in how we're functioning, and we're becoming more proficient in how we're functioning, and therefore we're accessing deeper levels of energy that we didn't have before, because they were covered or being convoluted by all these other dramas underneath the surface that we don't realize are happening. So it's very energizing, like clean, kind of like on our smartphones we have apps, and if you have apps running behind, like if you keep them running, they can run in the background, and they're all sucking energy from the functioning of the phone. So if we have all these things running in the background or beneath the conscious surface, we have all these things running that are unprocessed, then it's just sucking our life energy.
Yeah, and I think it's the symptom you mentioned of sucking our life energies would be a good way to put, because sometimes a practitioner or any person may feel like, I'm discouraged, I'm not on my best day, I'm whatever, depressed, confused. And of course, there may be so many reasons for that. I don't want to sound simplistic, but also one of the many reasons may be what I'm doing with my communication, where I am in terms of how I'm expressing myself, connecting with my own emotions, connecting with other people's emotions. So my point is, the answer to one's discouragement and depression, at least in a big level, will be found in where we are in those terms, where we are in that area, how we are able to communicate to one another and with ourselves in a transformative way. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a big point to always keep in our radar, so to say, to always, not in a neurosis type, but just like to always be willing on a daily basis, hopefully, to reassess how I am today conducting myself in terms of communication, and tomorrow how can I improve a little bit more and a little bit more, and not see that different my spiritual progress, basically.
Yeah.
So, Vrinda-sundari, any closing words you would like to share before we conclude our episode today? Some concluding reflections, something that comes to your mind that you feel it's important to present or to re-emphasize, some, whatever.
Yeah. Engaging in spiritual life means that we're experiencing freshness, that we're experiencing aliveness, and to the extent that we're going towards numbness, then we can see that there are some unwanted creepers that are getting in the way. And yeah, transformative communication is simply a part of the bhakti process. And if we're feeling stagnancy, then I think it's an indication. Like spiritual life is meant to be exhilarating, even now that we are experiencing some sense of aliveness and exhilaration in the discovery process. And so, yeah, and to encourage, I encourage everyone to create what they want, and create that freshness that they want, and to experience to have the freedom to trust oneself and to give oneself that space and to cultivate it with others. Like safety, confidentiality, being vulnerable, being on the growth edge, being alive.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally resonate with the idea of how all of our main spiritual practices have to do with what we talk today with transformative communication. Shravanam, learning to hear. Kirtanam has to do not only with singing, but also speaking. Sadhu Sangha is so crucial for us, but without transformative communication, we cannot talk about Sadhu Sangha. Even if we want to talk about our four regulative principles, they have so much to do with transformative communication, austerity of speech, speech that is truthful and beneficial, truthfulness being one of the principles, ahimsa, non-violence in our speech, non-violent communication. You chose it. Whatever we put our attention, we can find this transformative communication as all pervading as part of our life and practice. So thank you so much. Here, comment by Michelle Mistalk, some concluding praise for Vrinda-sundari. She's saying the epitome of personalism, Vrinda. So I think she's connecting you with that we also call radical personalism. So sorry for having labeled you as such, Vrinda-sundari, but maybe you are another radical personalist.
I'm in trouble.
That's the trouble we want for sure. So thank you so much. And again, I will share Vrinda-sundari's email for whomever would like to contact her. It's brinda@harmonistsanctuary.org for those who are listening. So again, thank you so much. And next episode, which will be next Saturday, just a brief announcement, Saturday, August 19 at 10 a.m. PDT time. I will be talking with Bhakti Rasadasi, and our topic will be upgrading our traditions past in the present moment. That's another topic, quite transformative, hopefully. I'm very connected to communication as well. So again, thank you so much, Vrinda-sundari. Thank you so much to everyone present.
Thank you.
For your presence, and see you next week.